The winter of 1942 fell heavy across both oceans. Gray skies over the Atlantic and the burning haze of the Pacific. The world was split between two great voids of water, and in those waters, two forces rose and clashed like ancient titans. The Navy and the Air Force, each claiming to be the key to ending the deadliest war humanity had ever seen. Commander Elias Roth stood on the deck of the USS Sentinel, an aging battleship assigned to escort convoys through submarine-infested waters. He watched the sea with the wary eyes of a man who had lost too many friends, too quickly. His ship rumbled beneath him, a steel giant built in an era when naval supremacy meant towering armor and massive guns. But Roth felt the shift of history like a pressure in his chest. Battleships were no longer the gods of the sea. They were prey. Half a world away, Captain Mara Elliston of the Air Corps stepped out of her B-17 bomber into the blinding midday sun of a Pacific airstrip. The air smelled of kerosene, sweat, and dust. Her squadron had flown 6 missions in 8 days, each one pushing the limits of endurance and luck. Air power was the new obsession of strategists, the sharp blade that could strike deep into enemy territory. And yet Mara knew the truth. Planes were fast, deadly, and fragile. One wrong gust of wind could end a hero's story forever. In Washington, the debate raged with the full force of politics and fear. Admirals argued that wars were won by controlling the seas, supply routes, blockades, amphibious assaults. Generals insisted the sky was the new battlefield. Bombing raids, reconnaissance, disruption of enemy infrastructure. The president listened quietly, weighing the nation's future against the ticking clock of global collapse. But war was not fought in meeting rooms. It was fought by people like Roth, who watched depth charges roll into the ocean, hoping they struck the submarines hunting them. By pilots like Mara, who saw tracer fire cut the night sky as they dropped their payloads over distant islands. By sailors fueling aircraft aboard carriers that were never meant to endure so much use. By mechanics who bled from scraped knuckles in makeshift hangars in the jungle. In early March, intelligence reported something different. Something that would force both branches to confront a reality they had avoided. A Japanese strike force, supported by a powerful naval fleet, was moving toward an island chain critical to the American defensive line. The island's airfield was barely functional. Its runway cracked from constant shelling. Its harbor was too shallow for battleships. Whoever controlled the island controlled the Central Pacific. The Navy insisted carriers must defend it. The Air Force countered that long-range bombers could cripple the enemy fleet before it arrived. But neither branch knew the full story. Deep within the enemy armada, an operation was unfolding. One that aimed not just to seize territory, but to lure the remaining American forces into a decisive trap. The Japanese Navy believed it could break American morale in a single crushing blow. Their admirals had studied the ocean like a chessboard. Their pilots trained for death before defeat. They counted on arrogance. They counted on rivalry. They counted on the United States not knowing what truly mattered. Roth received the orders first. His ship would join a carrier group moving toward the contested islands. He felt the weight of something terrible forming, like a storm brewing beneath the horizon. He wondered if he'd live to see the end of this war, or if the sea would swallow him as it had swallowed so many others. Mara received a different command. Her squadron would run reconnaissance ahead of the fleet. The Air Corps believed their role was simple: spot, strike, and cripple. But Mara sensed the danger behind the mission's confusion. She had flown long enough to know when something didn't add up. Neither of them knew they were being pulled into a single converging fate, a battle where the question that echoed across conference rooms and barracks would finally find its answer. Would the war be won by the Navy or the Air Force? A question that, in truth, would only be answered by sacrifice. The sky above the Pacific was a hard, brilliant blue, a color so cruelly beautiful that Captain Mara Elliston felt both alive and exposed beneath it. Her B-17, call sign Falcon 1, trembled as it climbed to 10,000 feet, the engines thundering like 4 angry hearts determined to beat in perfect unison. Inside the fuselage, the crew moved with the silent efficiency of men who had flown together long enough to sense the other's thoughts. Visibility's clear. Almost too clear, muttered Lieutenant Crane, the navigator, his pencil tapping nervously on the chart table. Too clear meant no cover. No clouds to hide in. No place to disappear. The squadron's assignment was simple on paper. recon the waters ahead of the advancing fleet. But Mara knew reconnaissance missions were rarely simple. The enemy was unpredictable. The ocean was enormous. And the smallest mistake could send a bomber and its crew spiraling into the water's cold grave. Mara steadied the aircraft and radioed the formation. Falcon 1 to squadron. Maintain vector. Eyes open for surface contacts. The voices of the other pilots crackled back, strained but steady. Below them, the Pacific stretched like a living thing. Shifting, shimmering, swallowing secrets. Sometimes Mara wondered how many planes slept on its floor, their metal bones resting among coral and silence. The thought made her grip the controls harder. 2 hours into the sweep, the radio man, Harlow, leaned forward. "Ma'am, radar spike at bearing 210. Large signature. Surface ships." Crane asked. Harlow swallowed. "Multiple. Big ones." Mara adjusted course and lowered altitude. The ocean rose toward them in shades of steel and jade as shapes emerged. Dark, angular, eerie. One ship. Then another. Then 6. Then more. Her breath caught. A Japanese carrier group. She had trained for this moment, studied silhouettes, memorized turret layouts. But seeing the Armada in the flesh, vast and crawling with aircraft ready to launch, it felt like watching a monster awaken. "Photographs," she ordered. The bomber dipped lower. The crew snapped images through open windows as anti-aircraft batteries turned like hungry eyes. A puff of smoke exploded near the left wing, then another. "Flak! They've spotted us!" "Hold her steady!" Mara shouted. "We're not leaving without confirmation." The bomber rattled violently as more bursts tore through the sky. One round shredded a section of the tail, but the Falcon 1 held. "Ma'am!" Crane yelled. "There's more, another fleet breaking east." A double-pronged force. A trap disguised as strength. They needed to warn the Navy immediately. "Pulling out," Mara announced, banking sharply. The bomber groaned under the stress, but the engines roared defiantly. The squadron climbed. Flak followed. Enemy fighters launched. The sky became chaos. 3 Zero fighters approached fast. Sleek, lethal, intent on silencing them. "Gunners! Light them up!" The tail gunner fired first, tracers stitching bright threads through the air. A Zero peeled away, smoking. Another swooped low, guns blazing. The Falcon 1 shook. A gunner screamed. Mara didn't look back. She couldn't afford to. "Almost clear." Harlow shouted. "Signal strength returning." "Send the intel." "Now." Harlow tapped furiously at the transmitter. Seconds crawled like hours. Message sent. Only then did Mara risk looking at the damage. One engine sputtered. The fuselage leaked smoke. A gunner lay on the floor, bleeding, unmoving. "God help us," she whispered. But they were alive. And they had the truth. The transmission reached the fleet just after sundown. Deep in the command center of the USS Titan, Admiral Reeves read the message twice, jaw tightening. A two-sided Japanese strike was forming. One designed to pull the U.S. carriers into a devastating encirclement. Reeves exhaled slowly. If the Air Corps hadn't spotted this. He didn't finish. Instead, he sent orders that would unite air and sea into one desperate counter-strategy. But not everyone agreed. On the USS Sentinel, Commander Elias Roth received the updated battle plan. He traced the coordinates, noting how dangerously far the carriers would be pushed. "They're relying too much on the flyboys," he muttered. "You don't beat a fleet from the sky alone." Yet, in the growing dark, another truth simmered. The biggest battle of the Pacific was coming. And neither the Navy nor the Air Force was prepared for what the enemy had waiting. The USS Titan's war room hummed with tension. Maps were spread across tables like wounded bodies, marked with red pins representing Japanese forces, blue for American. Officers crowded around Admiral Reeves, whose sharp eyes moved from diagram to diagram with surgical precision. "Gentlemen," he began, tapping the board, "thanks to Captain Elliston's reconnaissance, we now know the enemy intends to strike from 2 directions." Murmurs rippled through the room, a mix of disbelief and admiration. Reeves continued, "The Japanese are betting we'll commit all carriers to the First Fleet. If we do, the secondary force will flank us and cripple our air support." A captain stepped forward. "Sir, the Navy can still handle this. Our battleships—" "No," Reeves cut him off. His voice was calm but edged with steel. "This war has changed. Battleships are too slow, too vulnerable. Our carriers are the heart of this fight." The old guard admirals stiffened. They resented the rise of aviation, a threat to naval tradition, naval glory. But deep down they recognized the truth. The ocean was no longer ruled by ships alone. Reeves tapped another map. "We have two choices. Engage the closest fleet and risk the flank, or split our forces. But splitting makes us weaker." The room fell silent. One commander finally spoke. What about the Air Corps? Could their long-range bombers delay the Second Fleet? All eyes shifted to the Air Force liaison, Colonel Davenport, who adjusted his glasses nervously. "Our bombers can soften their formation, yes. But without naval cover, their losses would be severe." Roth listened from the corner, arms folded. He distrusted Davenport. Too academic, too certain. War wasn't equations. It was blood, luck, instinct. Reeves studied the chart until the lamp's glow painted deep lines across his face. "Then we'll do this. The carriers will advance. The Air Corps will strike the eastern flank. Our battleships will support the retreat path." Roth stepped forward. "Sir, with respect, if our carriers push too far, they'll be exposed. Their aircraft won't return before nightfall." "Commander," Reeves said quietly, "if we don't engage now, we lose the Pacific." The words hit like cannon fire. Roth bowed his head. He knew Reeves was right. But he also knew the cost. Far above deck, sailors scrambled in preparation. The Titan's flight crews checked every bolt, refueled every plane, reloaded ammunition. The sun dipped low, staining the sky red as if foreshadowing the blood that would spill at dawn. In her quarters on the airstrip, Mara Elliston received the updated orders. Her squadron was to join dozens of bombers in a massive preemptive strike. She sat silently for a moment, staring at her folded flight jacket. "Ma'am," Crane asked, "are you all right?" Mara exhaled. "We're hitting them first. Hard. And if they hit back harder?" She didn't answer. Instead, she looked out the window at the sunset, knowing that men like Crane trusted her with their lives. That tomorrow some would not return. Night settled over the Pacific like a blanket soaked in fear. Roth stood on the bow of the Sentinel, watching the moon rippling in the water. The sea looked calm, deceptively calm. "You ever get the feeling," he said aloud, "that the ocean knows what's coming?" Beside him, his friend Lieutenant Ward chuckled softly. "The ocean doesn't care, Commander. It's the dead who do." Roth nodded once. He thought of the Air Corps pilots flying into hell. Thought of the young sailors sleeping below deck, unaware that tomorrow fate might summon them. Thought of his family back home, waiting for a letter that might never come. "Ward," he said quietly, "you ever wonder which one will matter more? Ships or planes?" Ward shrugged. "Maybe it's not about which wins the war. Maybe it's about how they fight together." Roth gave a small, sad smile. Maybe. But he wasn't convinced. On the Japanese flagship, Admiral Kaito studied his own charts. His forces were positioned exactly as planned. His carriers primed. His pilots eager. "The Americans will come," he whispered. His XO bowed. "And when they do, Admiral, our wings will crush them." Kaito turned slowly. "No. When they come, the ocean will swallow them whole." For both sides, dawn would bring clarity. And fire. Dawn broke like a blade slicing open the horizon. The first light revealed the silhouettes of American carriers. Titan, Valor, Magnolia, cutting through choppy waves as they pushed toward enemy territory. Aircraft crews scrambled across flight decks, their boots clanging on steel as they prepared for the launch. Above them, the sky glowed gold. Below them, the ocean trembled with engines. Roth gripped the railing of the Sentinel as fighter squadrons began to take off from the fleet's carriers. The roar of propellers was deafening. One by one, planes shot forward, lifted, and vanished into the widening sky. Ward exhaled. "Godspeed, boys." Roth watched the last plane rise before turning to Ward. "God help us all." Mara's bomber was among the first airborne. The Falcon 1 joined a formation of 20 B-17s headed toward the eastern Japanese fleet. The air was tense, filled with unspoken dread. Crane looked over the map. "If our info is right, we'll reach the enemy in 40 minutes. If it's wrong," Mara said, "we'll find them when they find us." Harlow checked the radio and added, "Air Corps Command says the Navy carriers are already engaging the Western force." Mara's stomach tightened. That meant timing was everything. If her bombers struck too early or too late, the carriers would face both enemy fleets alone. She whispered a silent prayer. The Navy's fighters were the first to clash. Dozens of American Wildcats dove from the clouds, streaking toward Japanese Zeros that rose like angry hornets. The sky exploded with machine gun fire. Trails of black smoke spiraled downward as planes dropped from both sides. On the deck of the Titan, Admiral Reeves watched the distant battle through binoculars. "Status?" he asked. "Enemy fighters heavily engaged. Our bombers en route. Anti-air batteries ready." Reeves lowered the binoculars. "Keep the carriers protected. If they fall, we lose everything." The enemy fleet fired its opening volley. Water erupted around the Titan, geysers rising as shells missed by yards. Then one hit. The Valor, second carrier in the line, took a direct strike on its aft deck, flames bursting upward. Reeves clenched his jaw. "Damage control. Keep them afloat." The Pacific echoed with thunder. The battle had begun in full. As American fighters struggled in the skies, Mara's formation approached the eastern enemy fleet. The Japanese ships were spread wide, a trap ready to close. Crane gasped. "There. Carriers dead ahead." Mara steadied the bomber. "Bombardiers, prepare." AA guns opened fire immediately. Black puffs filled the air. The Falcon 1 rocked violently. "We're taking heavy flak," Harlow yelled. Mara forced the bomber forward. "Hold steady." Bomb doors open. The bombardier locked onto the largest carrier. 5 seconds. The plane lurched again. Metal screeched. "Bombs away." Explosions lit the enemy deck as the bombs fell. Fire erupted across the carrier. Fighters trying to take off were thrown sideways in flames. Cheers erupted inside the Falcon. Scratch one carrier. But celebration ended as a Zero dove directly at them. Gunfire shredded the fuselage. Glass shattered across Mara's lap. A second Zero followed. "Evasive." Crane shouted. "I'm trying." Mara yelled, pulling the bomber into a desperate climb. One engine sputtered, coughing black smoke. Then another. Falcon 1 was dying. But Mara refused to. "Turn us toward home," she ordered. The bomber, bleeding oil and flame, limped away from the battle. On the Sentinel, Roth received the first reports. Eastern enemy carrier hit. Heavy damage. Ward grinned. The Air Corps did it. Roth allowed himself a single moment of relief. But then the next report came. Multiple bomber casualties. Survivors uncertain. Roth swallowed hard. War had a way of turning victory into mourning within seconds. On the Japanese flagship, Admiral Kaito watched the burning carrier with narrowed eyes. "Impressive," he said softly. "But not enough." He pointed to a location on the chart. "Send the reserve strike group." The XO paled. "Admiral, that will push our pilots to their limits." Kaito's voice was calm. "So be it." Far above the sea, hundreds of aircraft maneuvered into deadly formation. The carriers were exposed. And the next wave was already coming. The afternoon sky had transformed into a shattered mosaic of smoke, fire, and falling metal. From the deck of the Sentinel, Roth watched the battle unfold with grim awe as fighter after fighter streaked overhead. "Incoming strike group." Ward shouted, pointing westward. Roth raised his binoculars and saw them. Over 50 Japanese aircraft in tight formation, flying low and fast. "Sound general quarters," he roared. "All hands prepare for impact." The alarm blared across the ship. Sailors dashed to stations, loading anti-air shells, securing fire lines, reinforcing hatchways. The sea churned beneath the battleship as engines roared to maneuver into a defensive position. The Japanese strike force aimed directly for the carriers. "They're coming in too fast." Ward yelled. "We won't stop them all." Roth's fists tightened. "Then we stop as many as we can." On the Titan, Admiral Reeves stood unflinching as the attack approached. "Focus fire on torpedo bombers," he ordered. "Fighters can't sink us. Torpedoes can." The first enemy dive bomber plummeted toward the deck. Anti-air guns lit up, peppering the sky with tracer rounds. The bomber burst into flame and spiraled into the sea. But more followed. A torpedo skimmed across the water, cutting a white line toward the Valor. "Brace!" It hit amidships with a violent roar. Flames shot skyward. Smoke billowed across the formation. Reeves slammed his fist onto the railing. "Get those fires under control." Another torpedo bomber swooped low toward the Titan. Ward's voice came across the radio. "Sentinel engaging. Firing broadside." The battleship unleashed a barrage that shredded the incoming aircraft in a spectacular burst. Roth exhaled shakily. "That's one." But many more remained. Far from the carriers, Mara fought to keep Falcon 1 airborne. 2 engines were dead. The plane flew like a wounded bird trying to outrun a storm. Crane rushed to the cockpit. "Ma'am, Harlow sent distress signals, but we're too far. No response yet." Mara nodded grimly. "Keep us steady. We're making it back." Inside the fuselage, the crew worked desperately to keep the bomber from falling apart. The tail gunner bled heavily. The radio man held him, whispering prayers. Smoke stung Mara's eyes as she scanned the sea below for a landing strip. "We're losing altitude," Crane warned. "I know." The bomber dipped lower, dangerously close to the waves. "Come on, hold together." Then, miraculously, Crane pointed. There, a friendly escort ship. Mara's breath caught. One hope. She guided the dying bomber toward it. Back in the battle, the enemy's final wave approached the Titan. The carrier's deck crews scrambled to ready last-resort fighters. But the Navy had one more surprise. Roth's battleship cut across the formation, guns blazing. The Sentinel acted as a shield, taking fire meant for the carrier. Shells exploded across its deck. Sailors were thrown to the floor. Smoke engulfed the bow. Ward coughed through the chaos. "Elias, fall back. We're getting torn apart." Roth's voice was fierce. "Not until the carrier is safe." He gave the order for a full broadside. The Sentinel's cannons roared with a force that shook the ocean, tearing through 3 enemy bombers at once. Cheers erupted. But the celebration froze as a torpedo slammed into the battleship's forward hull. The Sentinel lurched violently. Roth hit the deck hard, gasping. "Damage report," he shouted. The reply came through smoke, flooding in compartments 2 and 3. Fire spreading. Roth forced himself up. "Seal the compartments. Keep firing." The battleship burned. But it held. On the Japanese flagship, Admiral Kaido received a grim update. "Sir, our eastern carriers are failing. And the Americans, they fight harder than expected." Kaido closed his eyes briefly. "Then the sea will decide." He gave the order. All remaining aircraft launch. It was the final roll of the dice. The outcome would determine the Pacific. And history. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the burning sea. Smoke rose in massive columns, blotting out the horizon as both sides unleashed their final reserves of firepower. Above the battlefield, hundreds of aircraft maneuvered in a chaotic ballet. Looping, diving, firing, exploding. Fighter squadrons tangled in dogfights so close that pilots could see the fear in their enemies' eyes. The air smelled of burning oil, metal, and death. Mara's bomber limped toward the escort ship, an American destroyer racing to intercept them. "Falcon 1, this is USS Harriman. Signal received. Preparing rescue." Mara almost collapsed with relief. Thank God. But the bomber was too low, too damaged. Crane shouted, "Ma'am, the landing gear is gone." "We ditch in the water," Mara responded. "Brace for impact." The bomber hit the waves hard. Water surged inside. The crew scrambled out as Falcon 1 sank beneath the surface. Mara helped the wounded tail gunner to a raft. Moments later, sailors from the Harriman hauled them aboard. "You're safe now, Captain," a medic said. But Mara shook her head. "I'm not staying. I need to get back to command." The medic stared stunned. "Ma'am, you just survived a crash." She looked him dead in the eyes. "And there's still a war out there." On the Sentinel, fires raged uncontrollably. The ship groaned like a wounded animal with each wave. Roth, coughing from smoke inhalation, stumbled across the deck. "Ward." "Status." Ward pulled off a charred glove. "We sealed the flooding, but the forward batteries are gone. We're fighting blind." Roth steadied himself. "As long as we float, we fight." Above them, the sky exploded as the Japanese reserve wave descended upon the fleet. Dozens of enemy dive bombers swooped toward the Titan, screaming like banshees. American fighters launched to intercept every last plane the carriers had left. The carrier decks flashed with muzzle fire. Bombs whistled down, detonating across the water and decks. One bomber dove straight for the Titan's bridge. Reeves stared at it, unflinching. A burst of AA fire struck the bomber at the last second, causing it to spiral and crash into the sea. Reeves didn't even blink. "Get our last fighters airborne," he commanded. "We end this now." In the skies above, Lieutenant Parker, one of the Navy's best pilots, fought with a fury he'd never felt before. His Wildcat rolled and dove, chasing a Zero through clouds of smoke. "We've got to protect the carriers," he shouted into the radio. Another Zero locked onto him. Parker braced. Then a roar filled the sky as a squadron of Air Corps fighters arrived, diving into the dogfight from the east. "Air Corps." Parker gasped. "What are they doing here?" A calm voice came over the radio, returning the favor. Parker grinned fiercely. Together, Navy and Air Corps pilots formed a shield around the carriers. Their combined force broke the momentum of the attack. For the first time in the battle, the Japanese assault faltered. On the Japanese flagship, Admiral Kaido sensed a shift. "Reports," he demanded. "Multiple squadrons destroyed. American fighters regrouping. Our carriers, they cannot sustain more hits." Kaido's jaw tightened. His plan was failing. But he wasn't done. He pointed to the last remaining torpedo squadron on deck. "Launch them." His XO hesitated. "Sir, if we lose them, we lose the war either way," Kaido said quietly. His eyes hardened. "If we strike their largest carrier, we still have a chance." Back on the Titan, alarm screamed as the final enemy torpedo squadron approached low across the waves, hugging the sea to avoid radar. Reeves' voice boomed, "All batteries, open fire." Shells erupted across the water. But the torpedo planes kept coming. Roth watched helplessly from the burning Sentinel. "Come on! Come on!" Parker's squadron fought to intercept, shooting down several enemy planes. But not all. One torpedo bomber slipped through the chaos, closing fast. It released its weapon. The torpedo hit the water, racing toward the Titan like a shark. Reeves braced. Sailors shouted warnings. The ship couldn't turn in time. The torpedo struck. The entire carrier shuddered violently, flames roaring from the impact point. Men were thrown across the deck. Parker's voice cracked over the radio. "Admiral, are you?" Static answered. Smoke engulfed the command tower. The fate of the Titan, and the battle, hung in balance. The explosion ripped through the Titan with the force of 100 thunderclaps. Fire and smoke swallowed the starboard side as sailors rushed to contain flooding. But the carrier, though wounded, refused to die. Admiral Reeves emerged from the smoke, coughing but standing. "Report. Damage severe, sir. But we're still afloat." Reeves nodded, fierce. "Then keep fighting." Above the sea, The battle had reached a fevered crescendo. Parker's remaining fighters dove relentlessly into the fray, supported by Air Corps reinforcements who pushed their battered planes far beyond safe limits. What's left of the enemy? Parker radioed. Scattered. Disorganized. But a few bombers still active. Then we finish this. His Wildcat soared upward, sun glinting off its wings, before plunging into a final dogfight that would be remembered for decades. On the Sentinel, Roth oversaw evacuation procedures, knowing the battleship had taken all it could endure. Ward limped toward him. Elias, we've done all we can. Roth looked at the burning horizon, rage and pride choking his throat. She held the line. That's what matters. A junior officer rushed up. Sir, enemy flagship sighted withdrawing. Roth's eyes narrowed. The battle was turning. On the Japanese flagship, Admiral Kaido stood rigid, staring at the burning wreckage of his remaining carriers. His XO approached slowly, defeat in his voice. Admiral, our forces are broken. We cannot continue. Kaido closed his eyes. He had gambled everything. And lost. He bowed his head. Signal retreat. The final order of the battle. Back on the Harriman, Mara stood on deck, wrapped in a blanket, bruised and exhausted, but alive. She watched the sky as American fighters returned, some trailing smoke, others missing entirely. Crane limped toward her. We did it, he said softly. Mara nodded. The Navy, the Air Corps, everyone. We did it together. Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with the weight of all who would never return home. Hours later, Reeves called for a full fleet regroup. Roth and the survivors of the Sentinel were brought aboard the damaged, but still standing Titan. When Roth stepped onto the carrier deck, he locked eyes with Mara, who had just arrived via rescue transport. The two stood silent for a moment. Two different worlds, air and sea, meeting in the smoke of victory. Finally, Roth spoke. Your bombers turned the tide. Mara shook her head. Your battleships held the line. Reeves joined them. History will ask what won this war, the Navy or the Air Force. He gestured to the burned horizon. But the truth is simpler. They waited. Reeves said quietly, neither won it alone. War was not a contest of branches. It was a mosaic of sacrifices. 1,000 small victories. 1,000 losses. Together they had saved the Pacific. As night fell, the ocean grew calm again, as if trying to wash away the day's crimes. Smoke drifted upward in thin ghosts. The sea carried pieces of ships, pieces of lives, into its endless memory. Mara looked at the waves and whispered, the sea remembers. Roth nodded. And so will we. Though the debate continued for generations. Navy or Air Force? Carriers or bombers? The truth of the battle survived in the hearts of those who lived it. The war was won not by a branch, but by the people who refused to give up. The sky and the sea had fought as one, and the world was changed forever.